The Possession Files is a Red Treehouse exclusive series. You can listen wherever you stream podcasts. Simply search for the Red Treehouse or the Possession Files, and be sure to follow, like, and subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. A quick shout out to Clarion Taylor for joining the Red Treehouse Patreon. I appreciate your support, and it helps to keep the show going for years to come. An important note: sources for this episode can be found in the show notes. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. You know, it's interesting. A few weeks ago, I asked on social media whether folks believed demonic possession was real, and if the devil or demons could invade a person's body and mind. The responses were mostly split, with some holding some form of belief, and others disbelieving altogether. What struck me the most was the certainty in most of the responses, regardless of belief. There were some who were adamant that demonic possession is not real, and that it's easily explained by medical science and mental health diagnosis, and that exorcism is not a real treatment or cure. And of course, there were some who were convinced that demonic possession is real, in part because it helps explain the unexplainable, and in part because they knew someone who had experienced it. My goal in telling Anneliese's story is not to convince you what you should believe, and I suspect that even if I tried, most people would double down on their already held convictions. I am hopeful, though, to present Anneliese's story as balanced as possible, to show both the medical and mental health concerns, diagnoses, and treatments, and the spiritual convictions, beliefs, and options. In this episode of The Possession Files, we're going to consider whether Anneliese's afflictions were medical and mental health related, or if they were spiritual. And as her story progresses, we're going to see that Anneliese, her family, treatment providers, and religious leaders all had their own beliefs. I'm your host, Will, and together, let's explore the Possession Files, the Trials of Anneliese Michel. In the fall of 1973, Anneliese enrolled at university in Würzburg, majoring in education and theology. And though she knew several girls who attended with her, she missed her family dearly. At the time, she and Father Alt were meeting several times each month, and despite taking her medication regularly, Anneliese's depression persisted. And so did the demonic faces. Attending lectures proved difficult, and she despaired of her circumstances, stating, quote, "I wake up in the morning with no desire to live, and in the evening I feel exhausted. I wish I could finally live a real life again." End quote. A friend of hers, Ursula Kuze, provided additional insight. Quote, "During the first few weeks, Anneliese was quite withdrawn and depressed. She had to be constantly urged to do things, and she usually only attended lectures when we invited her to." End quote. But soon enough, a chance meeting would offer Anneliese some hope. In November 1973, her school sponsored a dance, which Anneliese's friends persuaded her to attend. While there, she met another student, a young man named Peter, who was described as, quote, "slim like her, with curly black hair and interesting eyes." End quote. The two connected instantly, and quickly discovered they attended many of the same lectures, and Peter encouraged Anneliese to attend so they could spend more time together. The change in Anneliese was stark and noticeable, with Ursula Couget stating, quote, "She was completely changed. Anneliese truly came alive, often going out with Peter to dance or play bowling, which she had not done before. Her cheerfulness was striking. She no longer avoided company and behaved like a young girl in love." End quote. It seemed that Anneliese was blossoming after years of struggle. But 2 weeks later, she told Peter they needed to stop seeing each other. When he asked why, Anneliese told him, quote, "I'm often depressed, and that's not good for you." End quote. Peter tried to normalize it, reminding her that everyone gets depressed occasionally. However, Anneliese was unmoved, stating, quote, "But for me it's something else. Let's say it's a condition. Believe me, Peter, you'll save yourself a lot of worry if you stop caring about me." End quote. Peter remained undeterred, and often encouraged Anneliese to continue seeking treatment, and that all it took was finding the right doctor to help. On November 27th, Peter accompanied Anneliese to a visit with Dr. Lenner, during which her symptoms were noted as, quote, "She describes how difficult it is for her to concentrate or even listen carefully. I don't want to do anything anymore. Nothing interests me. I'm going around in circles. I have no idea what I want." End quote. Anneliese found she was more comfortable talking to Dr. Lenner than Dr. Luthi, and he requested she come back the next day for an EEG. On November 28th, she arrived at the neurological clinic on Fuchlenstrasse, where an EEG was conducted during sleep. Interestingly, it was noted, quote, "An epileptic chart that indicated focal brain damage in the left temporal lobe." End quote. Several years later, Dr. Schleip, who completed the EEG, stated, quote, "Based on the previous medical history, the description of the seizures, and the EEG results, we had to assume for diagnostic purposes that this was a seizure disorder, i.e., epilepsy." End quote. Dr. Schleip, convinced the Zentrapil was not effectively managing the epilepsy, recommended Anneliese stop taking it immediately, and instead prescribed Tegretol. Now here's where it gets interesting. Dr. Lenner, trained in Freudian psychoanalysis, believed Anneliese was, quote, "a young girl who had been developing neurosis for a long time, apparently caused by her father, who never understood her, and her mother, whom she despised because she forbade her to go out with boys. A girl doesn't need a boyfriend before she gets married, and didn't allow her to go to dances." End quote. Dr. Schleip, a neurologist, believed Anneliese's depression, lack of motivation, relationship difficulty, and the rotten smell that was ongoing were the result of some type of brain damage. In this instance, Anneliese was navigating two doctors, offering two different diagnoses and two different treatment options. Except here's the thing. Anneliese did not tell Dr. Lenner or Dr. Schleip about the demonic faces, an important detail that may have altered the course of Anneliese's treatment. In the weeks following her appointments, Anneliese and Peter continued to see each other. Peter supported Anneliese as she dealt with bouts of depression and talked about her religious convictions and experiences. And though they were very fond of each other, Anneliese was often guarded and seemingly withheld information from Peter. Then, in mid-December, she opened the floodgates, implying that while the new medication was helpful in some ways, it did nothing for quote-unquote, this other problem. She explained to Peter that she often smelled rotten eggs, and that at times, her family did as well. And no matter how they tried to get rid of the smell, it lingered in the air. Peter offered possible solutions, all of which Anneliese and her family tried endlessly. He also thought there may have been a connection between the strange smell and Anneliese's depression, which she firmly denied, stating, quote, "No, I don't think so at all. It seems to me that the depression and the stench appear at the same time, along with seeing devilish faces." Devilish faces? So you're hallucinating? I have to say that I don't know exactly what it means to have hallucinations. Suddenly they're just there. These faces. You could say, demons. No matter what I'm doing. Usually I'm even thinking about something else, something completely unrelated. I can't describe them. I also feel like I don't want to. You can't imagine anything more terrifying. Sometimes the faces are blurry. You could say they're like shadows. Most often, however, they are completely real. I see them just as I see you now in front of me." End quote. The two bantered back and forth, with Peter trying to understand and Anneliese doing her best to explain it clearly. Quote, "It's okay, just listen. The worst thing is that when all these horrible things happen, I have no control over myself. Anneliese, my true self, is sitting in a dungeon inside me and has absolutely no say in the matter. I, the visible Anneliese, do everything as if someone else were ordering me around. I fight against this loss of my will with all my strength, but I always lose. So why are you defending yourself at all? I have to fight against it, despite everything. Otherwise, I would lose myself." We'll continue right after this quick ad break. A few days later, on December 11th, Anneliese told Dr. Leonard that she believed her depression was now chronic, despite Tegretol offering some relief. For several months, Anneliese attended lectures, spent time with Peter, and met with her physicians. But her meetings with Dr. Alt became more infrequent as he relocated further away, making travel more difficult. She visited him in March 1974, during which she acknowledged the medication was helpful, despite the demonic faces continuing to show themselves. He recommended she continue meeting with her physicians and, quote, suggested she practice a stricter religious lifestyle, end quote. In May 1974, Anneliese met with Dr. Leonard and told him she was suffering from headaches, quote, mainly in her forehead that were very exhausting and prevented her from calming down, end quote. She continued, quote, I feel so torn. I feel that I am not a coherent whole, as if stretched between two poles, physically as well, end quote. Dr. Schleip was concerned Anneliese may not have been taking her medication consistently, contributing to lethargy, lack of focus, and painful headaches. As the school year began to wind down, Anneliese prepared for her teaching practicum. Her torment, though, continued unhindered, and when it became too much, she traveled to San Damiano and to see Father Alt, who was beginning to question whether Anneliese's afflictions were natural or spiritual. While visiting his superiors in Aschaffenburg, Father Alt discussed Anneliese's case in great detail, with the men exploring the possibility of hysteria or schizophrenia. Father Alt disagreed, stating, quote, I spent many years as a priest in Bonn. I often saw young people there who, being lonely, resorted to hysteria. I also met such patients in the neurological ward of the hospital. Anneliese behaves completely differently. This is not hysteria, nor is it schizophrenia. If I understand the girl correctly, it seems that her doctors do not agree on the diagnosis. There seems to be a suspicion of epilepsy, but maybe that's just my impression. And besides, she is being switched from one medication to another. Even her EEG is inconclusive, end quote. The religious leaders continued discussing the complexities of her case, and for the first time, seriously considered the possibility that Anneliese was externally afflicted by demonic forces, though they stopped short of declaring it full-blown demonic possession. In a letter dated September 17, 1974, to Bishop Stengel, Father Alt requested permission to perform a secret exorcism, but he was flatly denied and told to be patient and continue meeting with Anneliese. That same day, Thea Hine called Father Alt and requested a meeting. Felicitas Goodman recounts their conversation about Anneliese, stating, quote, "She arrived with her father and was feeling unwell, depressed, her eyes darting around, internally restless, externally tense. I gave her a solemn priestly blessing, not in the presence of her father, and a great weight fell from her. I prayed with her, and she felt even lighter. Her completely dilated pupils narrowed. During the 20-minute conversation, I repeated the priestly blessing and prayer. At one point, she decided that everything was fine again. Her stunned father said that his daughter had completely changed." As Anneliese's religious lifestyle grew deeper, she formed a prayer group with 2 peers from school. They discussed the state of the church, exchanged religious literature, prayed the rosary each night, and attended Mass. And for a time, Anneliese appeared to grow more energetic and joyous, though simultaneously more obsessed with her faith, and the belief that the end of the world was near, and that to survive, a person must make sure all their windows and doors were closed, and that praying at home was the path to salvation. Unfortunately, this uptick in her mood and energy level was short-lived. In January 1975, Anneliese met with Dr. Schleip for another EEG, which showed no change. She was advised to continue taking Tegretol, despite her depressive symptoms growing more concerning. By now she had little appetite, was gaunter in appearance, and stayed in bed more frequently, sometimes for several days at a time. With end-of-year exams looming, Anneliese continued to suffer from inner voices telling her she was eternally damned. She struggled to prepare for her exams and had difficulty choosing a thesis topic, leading her to consider taking a break from her studies. However, Dr. Voth, the school's director, dissuaded her from doing so, as he felt her academic performance was satisfactory. As the weeks passed, Anneliese began sharing her internal torments with Peter. She told him of the coldness she felt and the conviction that she was condemned, stating, quote, "I didn't know the reason why I should be condemned, but I constantly heard a voice inside me trying to convince me of this. I defended myself against it, but it was pointless." End quote. Around that time, Anneliese's friends recalled an incident where, while talking with Anneliese, she began pleading with them to, quote, "Please stop praying. It hurts. I can't listen to it." End quote. Except, none of the girls were praying aloud. And very suddenly, Anneliese's behaviors grew more erratic and aggressive. She developed an aversion to religious objects and icons. On one occasion, she took a painting of Jesus Christ off the wall so as not to have to look at it. On another, she threw a rosary into the corner during a prayer group. And she stopped going to church altogether, stating, quote, "It doesn't make sense. I only get to the church door and can't take another step." End quote. Something interesting. Anneliese's friends and family speculated that her aversion to attending Mass may have been due to a physical ailment. Separately, they recounted instances where it appeared as though Anneliese had difficulty walking, stating, quote, "She can't seem to bend her knees. It's like she's walking on stilts." End quote. This happened often enough that her family discussed it amongst themselves. It was as if Anneliese could barely walk and held onto furniture while sliding her feet. On July 1st, 1975, Father Alt met with Anneliese, during which she told him about her lack of control, stating, quote, "I want Peter and my friends to be with me, and when they come, I hurl insults at them. I have no control over myself at all. Please believe me, I need immediate help." End quote. During their meeting, Father Alt described Anneliese's behavior. Quote, "When I arrived, she opened the door for me. She was distraught. I think that was the first time she told me that she felt condemned. She kept repeating this afterwards. I prayed with her. She wanted to pray because she immediately took the rosary and straightened up. After about 3 Hail Marys, I noticed that she could no longer pray. She suddenly began to scream loudly. Tears streamed down her face. Then someone knocked on the door. I said, 'Please open the door and tell Peter to come in.' She went to the door and I heard, 'Oh, Anna, it's you. Please go and bring Peter.' Then she sat down again. Before we began to pray, I asked her if she had taken her medicine. She confirmed that she had. I gave her my blessing, but her state of despair remained unchanged. She was no longer crying or screaming, but I felt an enormous coldness radiating from her. Finally, I recited a trial exorcism in my mind, without articulating it. She immediately jumped up, frightened and ready to defend herself, and screaming loudly, tore her rosary apart. Her behavior was dangerous. Her state of agitation was intensifying. Finally, her friend arrived. She ordered him in a completely changed voice, 'Peter, get out.' Having made little progress in his meeting with Anneliese, Father Alt prepared to leave. But as he was doing this, he noticed a small piece of paper on Anneliese's desk. It contained her handwriting. Quote, "I lacked the courage to say what I wanted to say. I am a sinner. I saw it clearly today in the chapel, even though I imagined something else. I don't have the courage. I'm desperate. I'm afraid that the priest, my lack of trust, I am standing at a crossroads, either life or death. Deeply wounded, I no longer defended myself, and now I don't either. After Holy Communion, I am desperate, in my spirit and in my heart. An iron chain squeezes my heart. Fear, terror, my spirit is paralyzed. It will be more free. Despair will soon grow. The worst thing is that I no longer have a choice. Sometimes I see it as clear as lightning. Despair is rooted where there is life. It has become a state. Immense pride does not let me go. When I speak, my heart does not speak with me. I am afraid they will doubt me. Paralysis. Yet I surrender to every glimmer of hope, enslaved once again. I will get worse day by day if no barrier is erected." Concerned about Anneliese, Father Alt contacted her parents and insisted they take her home from school. They refused, convinced that her despair would pass. Except it didn't, and Anneliese remained in bed, unable to move or communicate. On July 17th, Anneliese's parents arrived in Würzburg and promptly took her to see Dr. Schleip. There, they inquired as to the cause of the brain damage in Anneliese's left temporal lobe. And they asked something else, if the doctor had any religious beliefs or convictions. At first glance, the question may seem random and unimportant, but it was a critical step in Anneliese's care, because the Michels were unsatisfied with Dr. Schleip's answer and took her home that day. It was a step towards the possibility that Anneliese may have been possessed by a demon. We'll continue right after this quick ad break. Back at home in Klingenberg, Anneliese's torment only worsened. And in July 1975, Anna Leipert, a friend of Anneliese's, recounted a scary incident Quote, I remember an incident from the summer of 1975. I was sitting with her in her room. Her friend Peter was also there. Suddenly, in the middle of a conversation, her face contorted and became ugly and deformed. I can't describe it in more detail. Her body stiffened, and it took half an hour for the spasms to subside. Her friend explained to me that these states were attributed to her being possessed. I myself also considered Anneliese's condition to be some kind of possession, because her contorted face was so devilish that I couldn't think of anything else. End quote. Father Alt confirmed this, having experienced it himself, stating, quote, in the meantime, Anneliese's condition had worsened. Prayer and blessings no longer calmed her, but irritated her. Her face was tense. One could say that she was no longer the same Anneliese. End quote. It was noted that very little changed for Anneliese in the days and weeks following her arrival at Klingenberg. Her legs remained stiff, and she was unable to pray. And then, the screaming started. One day, after a visit from Thea Hein, Joseph Michel reached out to Curate Roth, who was more local than Father Alt, and insisted he come to see Anneliese immediately. Initially, he declined, citing the bishop's refusal to allow an exorcism to be performed. Joseph Michel had Curate Roth listen to the screams and shrieks over the telephone, and he eventually met at the Michel's home. This was his experience. Quote, Mr. Michel greeted me and immediately led me to the guest room. There was a terrible stench in the room. It smelled of burning and manure, and it was a very pungent smell. Mr. Michel specifically drew my attention to this stench. He also said that Anneliese had been in this room earlier. I did not smell these odors in the other rooms of the Michel house, nor outside in the open air. Then I went with him to the kitchen, where Miss Michel ran up to me as if she wanted to attack me. She suddenly stopped about a meter in front of me, without saying anything. After a short while, she ran back and then headed towards me again. She stopped again right in front of me, frozen in place. I would like to add that Mr. Michel informed me during this visit that Anneliese said after his phone call with me, quote, Roth, that dog is coming too, end quote, even though he had not mentioned a word to her about my arrival. After, Anneliese ran towards me twice and stopped in a motionless position. She then began to thrash around and scream. She called out to me, Go away, Father. You're tormenting me. However, at her parents' request, I remained in the kitchen for the time being. Anneliese tore up her rosary and threw the pieces on the floor. In the meantime, I went outside with Mr. Michel, where he informed me of further details that had occurred during his daughter's fits of rage. At the insistence of the family and Mrs. Hein, I then tried to give Anneliese a blessing. As soon as I tried to take the cross out of my breast pocket, without Anneliese knowing that I was reaching for it, the demon inside the girl began to rage. Finally, she tried to throw a 5-liter canister filled with water from San Damiano. Significantly, the canister fell from her raised hands and landed next to her, not on me. After a short conversation with Mr. Michel, I returned to Breitenbrunn. End quote. At the end of July 1975, Anneliese received a visit from Peter. Quote, Suddenly, Anneliese stopped, without interrupting the conversation, and looked at herself in surprise. Then she began to move her fingers as if she were doing it for the first time. She started walking again, completely normally, first cautiously, then faster. It was only then that she seemed to notice my presence once again. Laughing, she threw her arms around my neck and exclaimed, It's gone. I'm free. Completely free as never before. Anneliese now wanted to hurry home to tell her parents about this event. That day, She hoped that she had overcome everything, especially since her state of being herself was something completely new. The next day, they both went to Würzburg, and Anneliese enrolled for the next semester. We were out shopping when Anneliese suddenly said to me, "I think it's starting again." Immediately her expression became tense and she was unable to walk. Fortunately, there were no aggressive attacks, which never occurred in the presence of strangers anyway. The way back took us over an hour instead of the usual 10 minutes. When we reached her room, her condition had worsened. Anneliese stood petrified in front of the cross hanging on the wall. She stared at it with hatred in her eyes. Her facial features were completely distorted. She growled with animalistic sounds and gnashed her teeth so loudly that one might have thought they would all break out. I began praying for her in my mind, without showing it any outward signs. At that moment, she snapped at me to stop. She calmed down again after about an hour. During that time, she did not move even a millimeter. The twists of her body were striking. Staring at the cross the whole time, she leaned her upper body back to increase the distance from the cross a little. At the same time, she tried to reach the cross with her hands. She later explained to me, "I wanted to take the cross in my hand, but I was constantly being pulled back against my will so that I couldn't reach it." End quote. Now concerned for Anneliese's health and well-being, Peter decided to stay with her in Klingenberg. And in a meeting with Father Alt, Curate Roth detailed his encounter with Anneliese at her home, stating, quote, "I no longer have any doubt that the girl is under the influence of demonic forces." End quote. Father Alt agreed, and was convinced that not only was Anneliese under the influence of demonic forces, but also that they were now residing in her. This conviction would have massive implications and consequences for everyone involved. You know, the more I read and research this case, the more tragic it feels. I'll admit that I only knew the most surface level and cursory details before tackling this project, and I'm sure that's true for most of us. But like the tip of an iceberg we see above the water, the reality is far deeper and more complex than we realize. I thought coming in that I would easily fall on one side of the argument or the other. It was a type of pride that says, "Of course it's this or that. How could it be anything else?" And that reveals a tragedy of sorts, because it's very possible that the truth may lie somewhere between the poles of our assumptions. I'll frame it as two questions, intended to serve as bookends. The first question: was Anneliese suffering from significant medical and mental health illnesses? It appears that she was. Now the second question: was Anneliese tormented by demons and evil forces? It appears that she may have been. Regardless of what you and I believe about this case, truly we are nothing more than outside observers who are looking back on the circumstances and passing judgment. The truth remains that Anneliese firmly believed she was being spiritually tormented, and that this spiritual torment was expressed in her mind and physical body. And as time passed and the treatments proved largely ineffective, her parents and priests and friends also began to suspect demonic oppression and possession. There's another truth we should consider, and this one is more personal. There are realities outside of our scope of testing, measurement, diagnosis, and treatment. Strange things occur that defy rational explanation. And on both sides of the argument, for believers and skeptics alike, our convictions are undergirded by a certain measure of faith. If we believe Anneliese was suffering from medical and mental health issues, and that given more time, science would have proven this, we have to acknowledge that our convictions are more faith-driven than evidence-based. And if we believe Anneliese was tormented by demonic forces, and that an exorcism was her only hope for relief, we also have to acknowledge that our convictions are more faith-driven than evidence-based. And that's what makes this case so difficult to grapple with, because we simply don't know with certainty what was going on with Anneliese. As Anneliese's story reaches a tipping point, we're going to see a strong turn towards the spiritual, effectively setting the stage for a series of dramatic and prolonged exorcisms intended to rid Anneliese of what she believed were 6 demons possessing her. We'll explore this in next week's episode. I'm your host, Will. I'll see you next time as we continue our exploration of the Possession Files, the Trials of Anneliese Michel.